in your opinion, what aspects of the current family justice, youth justice and child welfare systems act as obstacles to achieving good outcomes for adolescents? So what's in the way, do you think, in the current systems?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my answer to this will be predominantly focused on the child welfare system. As you know, Mary, that's where my research is situated more so than family justice and youth justice. And just as I was thinking for today and I'm really thinking about those obstacles, I think there's some major obstacles in terms of the way that collectively across the sector and in society we view the child welfare system, and I feel that increasingly we have debates that are really binary. So we have discussions about placements, for example, which are very much foster care, family-based placements are the absolute optimum, residential care is bad, and it's this very sort of binary simplified view of a system which is complex and nuanced. And I think that all the time we reduce those sorts of concepts down to those very simple binary, it should be A or B, without really thinking about it's a complex and nuanced system. Young people who are supported by the child welfare system have a whole range of needs and circumstances. It's not one size fits all. And so it sort of sometimes feels like it's trying to make a decision based on these very simplified decisions without really thinking about the system as a whole and what's right for young people. I also think that one of the obstacles we have at the moment is that, particularly when we think about adolescents who need support, who need to be placed, they are the group that we know the least about. So we've actually got a group of young people, and some of whom have experienced lots of early childhood adversity, might have a whole range of needs, have circumstances that need addressing, and yet as a group we know very little about their needs. We don't have systematic ways of thinking about needs at referral or measuring needs. We know very little about outcomes. And I think, again, a really simplified example, I think, just to illustrate this is if we take this binary view, family-based care is good, residential care is bad, and we focus on what works. Now, I've seen a recent analysis of residential care that says outcomes are poorer from residential care than they are from foster care. And then when you actually look at what sits behind there, that is analysis of young people between the ages of 4 and 17 who have experienced residential care. So then in terms of how decisions are being made, that's based on evidence that is comparing residential care for a 4-year-old with residential care for a teenager. So I think at the moment we have this fascination of what works, of wanting the gold standard of research, but we don't know enough about the young people's needs. And I think we also sort of focus on, so I'm trying to find my notes as well, but focus on quantifiable evidence and what works rather than how do young people experience this. So actually, if a young person has had a positive experience, then why are we not focusing on what were those ingredients as to how they experienced it and what were those particular elements? And we know some of those ingredients. We know about the importance of young people being involved in their decision making. But I think one of the major obstacles we have at the moment is this fascination of wanting to be able to quantify everything, but without really thinking about the experiential. And then just 2 other points on the obstacles, if I may. The fascination with value for money, and Mary, you know that I would rant about this forevermore, but as a sector, we see everybody talking about value for money, and essentially what people are talking about is low cost cutting. rather than value for money. And again, I think it comes back to the point of just because an intervention is expensive doesn't mean to say it's good value for money. Similarly, we know that there are some interventions, some placements which are really high cost and are not achieving good outcomes. So again, I think it's this view of value for money when we're not really talking about value. And also some of the issues around sufficiency of placement. So again, we've got groups of young people who are ending up being placed some distance away from their communities, their families, and it's severing the links that may be important to them, but it's because that's where placements are available.
Thank you. And all of which is music to my ears. I'd like to come back on a couple of things, because in a way, what you're talking about, I mean, it does seem then there's a way in which we research or use research is potentially an obstacle, because you could argue that all the research going back, from the 80s onwards doesn't necessarily give us that, family placement good, residential care bad position. So in terms of how we make better use of what research there is, as well as picking up on your point, we need more. Where do you think we've gone a bit wrong in really understanding what the messages from research are and being able to take them into practice?
I think it's several interrelated points. So again, I think there are significant gaps where it is young people with the greatest needs. I also think that in terms of research in the sector is that there has been this somewhat unhelpful focus on evaluating new systems or new interventions without actually looking at what is service as usual. I think also the emphasis on hierarchies of evidence is somewhat unhelpful. So again, absolutely, we should be looking at having very good quality longitudinal studies of outcomes where we can look at large cohorts, but it feels like that at the moment they are being favoured over a relatively small scale study of young people talking about their experiences and what made a difference to them. So I think there's something about the evidence base. There's also something about, and I think it is quite prominent in terms of a disconnect between research and practice. And, we have wonderful organisations like Colleagues at Research in Practice that help with that. But quite often we have this, what I would consider a very sort of traditional view of academics working over here, policymakers here, and local authority practitioners here. And we also know that if you have an academic team generating the evidence, unless there is an active interaction with that evidence within local authorities, then it's not going to make a difference to practice. So you can produce the outputs, you can produce the evidence, but it's really that whole process of thinking about what the evidence means for practice. So, I can sit here and say, well, actually, it's not helpful to think that we should be aiming for family-based placements for all young people, and we should see that residential care has a place within child welfare systems. But how does that transcend the academic into practice? And I think that's something that we all have a responsibility to do better, to think about what do these messages mean for practice, but then also how might those messages be implemented in practice and what is required in terms of the change. And I just think that the relationship is too much towards the kind of passive interaction with research rather than an active interaction. And again, I think that's where we need to collectively change the way in which we run research programs so that there's a much closer working between practitioners, local authority analysts, and academic researchers.
Okay. And one final follow-up point from me before I ask whether Mike has one, is around the value for money issue. I share your concern. I'm just wondering if you see any way in which that could be how best can that be challenged, really?
Um, I think we have started to challenge it. So we certainly did that when I worked with North Yorkshire around No Wrong Door, where when we did the evaluation of No Wrong Door in North Yorkshire, which is a multi-agency residential service for young people from the age of 12 and over, it's expensive. If you bring together a whole range of different professionals, then it is expensive. And so actually there it was about looking at the longer term. It was about looking at the distinction between who makes the investment, who sees the saving. And it feels really sort of crass to be talking in this way, but actually, if children's services are investing in a service, then they need to be working with their partner agencies to sort of say, actually, if we can improve the outcomes for young people, if we can improve their life chances, and these are the potential longer term costs avoided. But I think there needs to be some of those more in-depth understandings that we shouldn't have this short-term, short-sighted view. And I think, again, in recognition that is really difficult. And I think back to the early 2000s when I was working with government departments, a time when we were looking at invest to save strategies, is in times of austerity. And then, we're sort of just hopefully coming out the other side of a pandemic, is the huge pressures on local authority budgets. It's very difficult to think creatively, to think for the longer term. We've had an emphasis by government on short-term, one-year spending round cycles rather than comprehensive spending reviews. But until we start to take a longer-term view of potential cost savings and thinking about value for money, we're going to end up being in this very short-sighted cycle. And we see it with something where it looks like promising practice, but if it doesn't offer value for money or cost savings or cashable savings within 12 or 18 months, it gets forgotten and everybody moves on to the next new thing. And I think it's trying to move beyond that short-sighted view, but it's not easy.
Thanks. Mike, have you got any follow-up questions around the points Lisa was making there around
I've
research?
got one of the points I was going to pick up on was the misunderstanding between the professionals and the young people. My question would be, where would you think that misunderstanding actually starts, and how could it possibly end?
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, there's lots in that, Mike. And I'm going to draw back on my days in practice, which was a long time ago. But I used to work in a local authority children's home, and I think some of the issues that I experienced then and that I've seen with my research since is some of the misconceptions. And some of the prejudices or judgments about young people before a relationship has been established. So again, there's something about the way in which information about young people is recorded on case files and systems to understand the young people. I think there's also something about the ways in which practitioners, professionals work with young people in the sense of seeing the young person first and then the behaviours second. And also linked to that, I think there's also something, so again, I go back to the work we were doing in North Yorkshire with No Wrong Door, where they incorporated police into the residential hubs. And I remember having lengthy conversations with the police about how by doing that work and working with the young people in the residential hubs and getting to know the young person, there was a real shift in their ethos and understanding of the young people. And so I think, it's also just trying to get the professionals and the practitioners to really understand young people. And I suppose linked to that as well also comes back to training. and support for staff. So what training have they had around working with young people? And I think there's so much that is variable in terms of the training for staff. I think the other thing as well is about, and maybe this is going on a little bit further, but again, just thinking about sort of conflict or relationships between young people and professionals and practitioners, is that quite often, even where young people establish a positive working relationship with somebody, and it feels like for the young person that they have got an advocate, is that the system quite often will break those relationships where the young person moves on. So there's also something about continuity of relationships where the young person has established a positive relationship with somebody.
Nice. I love the answer. Just one more follow-up from that tiny answer there. So in terms of the training provided to these professionals, what do you think could be put in place? Would it be more time spent in training, or would it be more qualitative training?
I think it's a bit of both. And I think, again, it's not necessarily about one specific training model. So again, in my research, I've looked at, different training models for staff. So, social learning theory or social pedagogy. It's about, so I think particularly with a team who are working with young people, it's about all of them having a shared understanding and a shared vision and model. I think the other thing is that quite often the training happens in separation from the young people. And I suppose, I don't know whether I'm allowed to ask you a question, but I would come back with a sort of question on that. Is, again, just thinking about my research, there's a real distinction between whether young people want to know whether they're carers, so whether they're in a residential home or with foster carers, have been trained or are going through a training programme whilst the young person's in the placement, and whether the young person is part of that or just sees that their carers have gone off. And I would just say that I think there's something about ongoing training that is informed by young people as well. So rather than it just being something that happens in isolation.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Moving on now to question 2, which is the things that we've said 3, there could be fewer, there could be more, that you think actually are worth keeping in our current systems, even if they might need a bit of tweaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that we don't sort of just throw everything away and just say it's a system that is broken. And again, I suppose linked to that, I think we have such a negative rhetoric around care. So again, if you look at the statistics that are quite often reported in the media about low numbers of children in care going on to higher education, or that former children in care make up a high percentage of the prison population. So, I think we do have to focus on the positives, and for some young people, care was a positive experience. So I think that in terms of the current elements, I think that where we have ways of working, which again, I think there's key components. And again, I was trying to look at the ingredients. I think where we have some examples of very good practice where there is, so what we talk about is where there are examples of relational stability rather than placement stability. So any ways of working which are about supporting young people to have continuity of relationships. And I do think that we have got some really good examples of that, and that's something that we should be advocating for. So again, if a placement has broken down, so if we take that very simplified view of stability, placement has broken down, is that actually there can be some form of relational stability. And again, I think that emphasis on relational stability isn't just with carers, but it's also with birth family, it's with peers, it's with, it can be with a teacher or a Senko at a previous school. So I think there are elements in our child welfare system where there is a recognition of the importance of continuity of relationships. I also think that there are now elements of recognising the need for longer term support. And I say that in the basis that, we've had some really sort of positive moves in terms of policies to support young people up to the age of 25. I'd also like to kind of caveat that with, we've also had some really bad policy decision making in that there is support up to the age of 25, but that's just for young people in foster care, and those that are in residential care don't. And actually, we've also got the latest around the 16 to 18-year-olds. They can be in unregulated placements. So I think we have got some elements, and some of those ingredients for me are about continuity of relationships. It is about using placements like residential care, and again I use No Wrong Door as an example, when it's used more creatively. So again, instead of thinking about residential care comes right at the end of a placement sort of history, because it's this awful thing that young people end up in when they've sort of exhausted all family-based placements, to actually thinking about, let's try this early on, but let's not only try this as a placement, let's think about this in the round. So what support needs to go into the family unit so that the placement can become much more short term? So I think, again, we've got some ingredients there. For me, one of the biggest challenges is, when I talk about continuity of relationships, we've just seen my evaluation of lifelong links and the work that Family Rights Group have been doing around lifelong links and supporting that relational stability, the connections between pre-care and during care experiences. I suppose my counter to that would be, actually, is this not just an ingredient that should be par for the course in terms of children in care having that stability of relationships that transcends placements? And similarly, we should be thinking much more so, and again, we've got examples of support placements. So again, just thinking, if there is a family with adolescents that are really sort of struggling, is rather than let's remove child, young person from the family unit into a placement, rather than thinking about, okay, as a family as a whole, what are the issues that they're struggling with? Are there community-based risks? Can we take a holistic view to this? Can we have some form of support or respite placements? And that the support is also going into the family. So I think we are starting to see some really great ingredients there, which are about listening to the young people, listening to the family, continuity of relationships, using some of those more intensive services much earlier on, with a view that they become very short term and that it's about support.
Yeah, thank you. But you did also, and you also mentioned that some families, some young people need longer term support, and you gave examples of continuing support for care leavers. Is there other areas in which you think continuing support might need to continue? Do you think there needs to be, so there's something around using possibly sort of stronger interventions earlier on rather than later on, and possibly the need for some family units to need longer term support as well as the individual? Would that be something you would?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I use No Wrong Door as an example where the vast majority of the young people and the families that have been supported through No Wrong Door, and there are other local authorities developing variants on No Wrong Door, is some of those, or the majority of those, are supported as outreach support cases. So this isn't about the young person being placed. It is about the support for families And again, the flexibility in that support. I think the other thing is that we quite often think about this is the needs of the young person and the family. This is the solution. And look, 6 weeks later, things are great. And therefore we can close the case. Whereas actually it's more about thinking, yes, things are great, but rather than closing the case, can we reduce that level of support, which might be minimal, but it still means that there's some form of service or support that the family can go back to. And again, that's where I was sort of raising this point about relational stability. This is about supporting the families for the longer term, and it doesn't necessarily have to be really high levels of support. And I am going back a long time now, and Mary, you will remember the days of the Common Assessment Framework. And when we were doing some research around the Common Assessment Framework, probably about 12, 13 years ago, for lots of the families that we spoke to at that time, it was just that the family had a lead professional. There was somebody, that one single person who they felt that was with them throughout. And sometimes it would really be as simple as a text before they were due to go to a mother and baby group, or a text before they were going to try and get sort of teenager off to a youth club. And it was just that there was somebody else there that was thinking about them. And so I think some of these solutions are quite simple, but it means that it's that kind of longer term commitment to supporting children and families.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, have you got any follow-ups there before we move on to question 3?
No idea. Lots of gems in there for Dan to unpick.
Okay, thank you. So, Dan, do you want to ask question 3 now?
Sorry. Hello, Lisa.
Hi.
Hi. What is your vision for how things could work better for adolescents?
So my vision would be, which I think I've talked a little bit about because I've gone all around the houses this morning in lots of different directions, but I think the vision is one about listening to adolescents and understanding what they want. So rather than, as I say, making these very sort of simplified decisions of we think that young people would be better off placed within a family, is actually recognising for some young people that might not be what they want at that point in time. I think the other thing is it links back to these relationships, and actually, as a parent of an adolescent, what I want is to create the foundations to let her go off, have the independence to flourish, but know that she's got somewhere to come back to. And I think that's what we need to really focus on for adolescents who are in the care system, is that they have got that support network. So it doesn't necessarily matter who it is, but so that they have got those opportunities and feel well supported to go off and achieve what they want to achieve. And again, I think it is about having people that believe in you and you're an adolescent. I think it's a really difficult point in our development and our lives. It was a while ago for me, but I do remember it. And it's such a difficult point in our lives. And I think, again, for me, the vision is about, if it's not possible for young people in their adolescent years to live at home, then how do we create those foundations to ensure that they have the opportunities that they can go off and try things, and that they always know that there's going to be somebody there that's essentially got their back.
Thank you, that was great.
Have you got any follow-ups, Dan, on that?
You said about... Oh, sorry. Oh. I was going to ask one. As a care social worker, is it? I can't remember.
I was a residential social worker a long time ago.
How could you see that? What was one thing that you could improve on that, like an element of that, as a residential social worker?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, when I think back to, as I say, so I worked in residential social work in the early 1990s. I was in my late teens and my early 20s, so very, very young. So I think there's a lot that I would do differently was I to work there now. I think, again, when I look at the research around residential care, I think there were some things that we did really well. So we did lots of activities with the young people. It was the days when we used to get out on a Sunday afternoon and play football with the kids and invite all the kids in the community. But I also think there was something about creating that perspective or that environment of home. And I think, again, when I think back to that sort of children's home where we had the office and the staff would go to the office to do the case recording, is I think that now, with the benefit of hindsight, with, maturity, given it's sort of, a good sort of 30 years on, and what I've learned about residential care and the research with young people is actually thinking about that as the young person's home first and foremost, and that by having that office environment where you're writing the case records is, again, actually thinking about recording is really important, but actually doing that in a way that is much more in partnership and has that openness and transparency with the young people, which I just don't think was there 30 years ago. But as I say, that's a long time ago now.
Thanks. Mike, have you got anything that's occurring to you you'd like to probe a bit more?
I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards like I don't know. It's hard to word it. Like, do you think no, I can't word it. No.
Right. Okay. It might come to you in a moment. I wanted to ask you a bit more, Lisa, about you've talked about the importance of relationships and helping young people maintain relationships, and that being one of the key things. Would you say that, in fact, actually I think you did say that it's also partly an obstacle in that we have a system which seems to lend itself to breaking relationships rather than sustaining them. I'm wondering how you think that could be addressed, either through the work you've done with possibly not so much No Wrong Door, but lifelong links, other studies you might have looked at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's come through in lifelong links and also some work that I did around supporting reunification in 2012, 2013, is that part of the breaking of the relationships, and I think, again, not necessarily intentionally, when a young person comes into care, particularly if there are safeguarding concerns, then the emphasis is on safety, and those relationships tend to be broken. What we have seen in research is that actually, even then, when there is an emphasis on trying to re-establish relationships, even if it means that the young person can't go back and live with family, is, we all like to have relationships with people, even if we don't necessarily want to live with them, is that if it's that same social work team or social workers that were involved in the initial decision that the child could no longer safely live with their family, then it's really difficult to reopen those relationships and those discussions about, okay, young person may not be able to live with you, but you have an important part to play in their life. And what we have seen with lifelong links is that lifelong links, which is about re-establishing those relationships, the fact that it is run through the family group conferencing service, where the underpinning ethos of that family group conferencing service is about collaborative partnership, working with families, then you've also got a workforce who are very skilled in understanding and ways of working with families, but you also have the family who can see that there is a disconnect between the part of the system that was involved in those initial decisions and the part of the system that is trying to re-establish those relationships. And it was the same when we were doing the work around reunification, when we were working with NSPCC at the time, is again, when there was work to try to reunify young people, is that the birth families that were involved in that research felt much more comfortable going through that process with an NSPCC social worker who they saw as entirely different and who was not coming with the preconceptions. And, you know, as I talked earlier this morning about preconceptions that we sometimes have around young people or their behaviours, it's also about those preconceptions of the birth family. And sort of thinking about, okay, reunification, we're not judging you, but we're trying to support you. So I think regardless of whether it's about re-establishing a return home or re-establishing relationships, there needs to be sufficient disconnect between that experience of young person being placed in care and then the subsequent work.
Yeah, thank you. I think also Mike's, yes. Were you coming in with something? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? I've got it. So from you starting your career, like you had a big why. Why did you want to get involved? Between there and where you are now, has there been any changes in remembering why you got involved and the perception you have on the care service itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I mean, I should be so I'm coming up for 50. My dad grew up in care, and I grew up with both of my parents working in residential care. And it's back in the days of the early 1970s where all of our family holidays were us going on holiday camping with the kids who were in the children's home. So I think for me, it sort of felt a bit like when I went into working in residential care, it felt a bit like going into the family business, as you get with, you know, other people who go into sort of the, you know, dad's building company or whatever. And I think when I look at some of the recent research and when I go and interview young people in residential care now, so as I say, my sort of experiences of it sort of span nearly 50 years from early childhood, where I used to go and spend lots of time in the children's homes, but obviously, you know, as a child of people working there, is there's so much that has moved on for the better. And I do think we have a much better understanding of what is good for young people. And, you know, again, we know from some of the reviews, for some young people, they have had horrific experiences of being in residential homes and all sorts of, you know, historic situations of abuse. And so I think there are things that have moved on, and, you know, we have a much better way of inspecting children's homes, for example, and that sort of safety net, which I don't think was there all of that time ago. But then when I look at some of the decisions that are made, and still this emphasis on residential care coming very late, I still think that there's an awful lot that we have got to learn. And I don't know, I suppose just going into children's homes, I was just trying to think the most recent times, a couple of years ago, you know, the whole thing about, you know, the young people all being in there in the kitchen baking, I don't know, it just took me right back to my days sort of in residential care. And I think, again, people quite often talk about some of the negative behaviours in children's homes and when there's conflict, but not enough about where sometimes there can be some really good some good times and some good experiences. Sorry, that ended up being a bit of a waffle, but it's just, I suppose I wanted to kind of explain why, I suppose, my passion and why I ended up working in residential care and why I'm doing the research that I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's wicked. Thank you.
I think that's really helpful. Is there anything else, Lisa, that as you've been talking, you've been thinking, oh, that's, you know, I'd like to say a bit more about that?
I think just one other point, and I don't quite know where it fits into the questions, but, you know, I think another thing is is the concept of therapeutic. And again, a bit of a bugbear where, what do we really mean by therapeutic? Is it a therapeutic placement? How does the young person experience it? And that distinction between therapeutic, which for me is about using a placement in a planned and purposeful way, where it's about trying to address specific needs for young people, rather than therapeutic means that the young person gets to see a clinical psychologist at 4 p.m. for an hour on a Wednesday afternoon. That for me is not a therapeutic placement. And I think, again, as a sector as a whole, we've got an awful lot of work to do to really move towards having a shared understanding and definition of therapeutic, which then means we can try to prevent the glossy brochures of very high cost placements that claim to be therapeutic. And then when you actually look what sits behind that, it is 1 hour of therapy on a Wednesday afternoon. Whereas, and it's much harder to navigate through, where are there really good positive placements which are underpinned by a therapeutic approach, and those that are potentially trying to provide a service which is not necessarily what the young person wants or needs.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I suppose, in my mind, what's the way you've been talking has, you're thinking back over the history, and I remember that history as well. And there is a tendency, it would appear, that we, to use a possibly unfortunate term, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So there were problems with residential provision. There were scandals, and there was the issue about a whole thing about the qualification of social workers at the time. Seems to have led to a sort of big change. When we're looking at ways in which we can change systems, do you think that has some lessons for sorts of things we need to guard against?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think there are some lessons learned, but yeah, I recently used that term, sort of, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then thought this is really an inappropriate term, but I couldn't also think of something better. Is, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of learning that has come along the way, and absolutely, we should not have our residential care workforce as being the ones who are the least qualified. That said, as I've already mentioned, and I went into residential care. I did my certificate in residential social work, very basic qualification. The reason why I was employed within the residential children's home at the time, and say very young, was that they recognised that within their staff group, they had a staff group who had all been working in residential care for a long time, were all, at the time, I thought, were really old because they were in their 40s. And the manager wanted to have somebody who was going to be much more of a conduit with the young people. So, again, I think for me, it raises questions and comes full circle back to what I was saying about the sort of binary. If you were to take this very sort of purist sort of position of saying, actually, we need our staff to have these basic levels of qualifications, should that be more prominent than, which, actually, when I think back, the manager of the home was quite perceptive to think about, actually, we need to have somebody working with these young people who can better understand some of the complexities of sort of adolescence. And I had a very specific role. Did I do everything as I would now? No. But, I think there are some elements of good practice there, and establishing relationships with some of the young people, and again, thinking back to those days it was when pupil referral units were just starting, establishing relationships with pupil referral units so I could work with them and the young people to try and get some GCSEs. So I just think it kind of comes back to, what do we really want for our young people? What do our young people need? And what are the different ways in which we might do that?
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else want to come in? Does Bev or Seth have any final questions, Lisa, before we let you go?
Hi, Lisa. Thank you. That was wonderful. I think I loved particularly the sort of major last point where you're talking about the concept of therapeutic work and the differences between the relational model and perhaps the more transactional. Really valuable that. I just wondered whether you wanted to say any more on that, or talk about the significance you mentioned about the disconnect of young people having a people working with their case and then looking at their future, and they're needing to be that distinction. Whichever point you'd like to elaborate on, I'd really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the therapy and therapeutic, I think I've kind of said the key point there really is, thinking about a therapeutic environment and what we mean by a therapeutic environment. And on the other point around the continuity of relationships, again, I come back to North Yorkshire's No Wrong Door, where they have committed to making sure that there is one worker that continues with that young person and that family up to the age of 25. And again, I think the importance there is not only the relationship with the young person, but the relationship with the young person, and where there is work with the family, that relationship is that continuity for the family as well. And it just means that I remember as a new parent speaking to somebody at work, and they talked about your sort of children being on a piece of elastic, and you let that elastic get a little bit longer as they get older. And I was thinking at the time, I can't see that. And now I can see that. And again, I think, this is about a relationship with a worker who is there, and it comes back to the sort of foundations of letting the young people go and flourish and try things, but knowing that they have always got that continuity of that relationship.